Fireside chat as well. And I will share some time reminders as we go along, just to keep things a little bit to schedule. So Shiwen, I would now like to pass on to you when you're ready. Thank you very much and have a great discussion.
Hi, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone participating. Good to see you, Yusing. I do apologize. It seems that Amit is not with us yet, but I think we can just start and continue from there. So, Yusing, I think starting from where we're looking at the current crypto situation, how do you think it's evolving right now, the regulatory, globally looking at the regulations that are evolving? What do you make of the operating terrain in terms of regulations?
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Yusing here. I'm actually representing Access, the association, as the head of regulatory subcom. So coming back to Shiwen's question, I would say that in the regulatory space, in the cryptocurrency industry, a lot is actually happening now, right? Huge events, lots of interest, lots of things that's actually happening. Clearly, I'm quite sure if you have attended a lot of international forums by IMF, by OECD, FedF, you would find that actually a lot of regulators are really starting to go into this space with regards to putting regulations into the cryptocurrency industry. What I'm going to do is I'm just probably going to briefly talk about FedF, Financial Action Task Force, because I just came out from V20 last week, and one of the key takeaways is that I would say FedF is probably the very first global organization that actually put in place some regulation that will be implemented by next year, June, all right, in which all the crypto companies will need to abide by, all right, and that's actually the introduction of what we call the travel rule, all right. The intention of travel rule, of course, it's really about when the crypto exchanges move cryptos among themselves, all right. We needed to now make sure that we send across sender information, beneficiary information, and things like that. This is part of the initiative that is needed, all right, especially in the area of anti-money laundering, and again, of course, that is really FedF, core mandate, right, is to manage all the money laundering activities, in the world. So this is one of the, what I would say is the first serious, regulation that is being put in place in the cryptocurrency space.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, just looking at, now that you come out of V20, I think, can you perhaps go a bit deeper into the travel rule and the implications that will have for the operators in the space? For digital asset holders?
Of course, at this point of time, the travel rule requirement is still pretty much limited to the virtual asset service provider or crypto exchange in layman term. Of course, we would see that there will be further regulation, all right, that might be coming on board soon, potentially in the area in DeFi, decentralized finance, P2P or private wallets, again in layman. We see that this is potentially some of the new things that is going to come in place, all right, to essentially put a proper framework in place so that the countries can then, operate behind some kind of minimum global standards, all right. Now, challenges are definitely abound, especially with our first attempt to regulate and introducing travel rule into the cryptocurrency space. The challenges, of course, that we face is that, number one, there's what we call as a sunrise issue, all right? Any regulation that you put in place that's global in nature tend to have to face with such problems, all right? The real reason is because, again, if I'm addressing all the RegTech company, founders or management staff who's on this call today, you realize that some of these are just not easy to implement. So things like interoperability issues, various solutions having different capabilities, right? So we have travel rule solution that is, number one, potentially that is still very much blockchain-like. Okay, they keep very much the blockchain idea. Then you have off-chain type solution that also works as well. So you got a multitude of all these kind of travel rule solution providers that's serving the market. So then the fundamental question is that what does that mean to me as a virtual asset service provider? Does that mean that I need to subscribe to each and every one of these solutions in order to talk to the other VARs in different jurisdictions? So that fundamentally is one of them. The good news is that a lot of these companies are beginning to see the necessity to actually collaborate more. And we are quite glad to see that in this V20 event, right, as opposed to the first one, which is in Osaka last year, things have actually changed quite significantly, even within 1 year. There's a lot more collaboration. Companies now are actually dealing with all these interoperability issues, and the whole idea for this is really, just to help the industry move along. But clearly, it is an unavoidable fact of the sunrise issue, right? We will just have to live with it. We will just have to partner up, work closely together, and try to push for, eventually a global adoption of travel rule.
Looking at the virtual asset service providers that you mentioned, what are perhaps the three main issues that have cropped up in terms of the enforcement that they should be worrying about under the travel rule?
Sorry, what do you mean by enforcement?
In terms of, with this new travel rule being implemented, what would perhaps be the three main issues that your virtual asset service providers should address to prepare for the sunrise issue?
Yeah, I would say that it's two or three key things. All right. Of course, number one, it's data privacy. All right, because you are sending beneficiary information or sender information, so data privacy. All the virtual asset service provider, depending on the jurisdiction, all right, it's where what are the data privacy laws that they have in place that they need to comply with, and still be able to comply with the travel rule requirements that's implemented across the world. All right, so that's number one consideration, right? The number two consideration, which I mentioned earlier on, is a lot of interoperability issues, right? If I subscribe to this service, does that mean that I can't talk to another virtual asset service provider that is using somebody else, solution? So interoperability is another big thing. But by and large, I would say these two are one of the biggest key thing. And the third one, of course, it's really because we are in a learning phase, right? The messaging standard complies with what we call IVMS 101 now, okay? And even as we speak, IVMS 102 is being developed, all right? So I would say that for the next couple of years, through lots more experience, we're going to learn, and we're going to have to upgrade, change, or remove certain things that doesn't work, So these are all the key considerations that VARs need to consider as well. And in Singapore, the compliance of travel rule is a definite must if you are going to get our Payment Services Act license, right, for your crypto company in Singapore. So there's no negotiation on that. You just have to comply with it. So VARs would therefore have to consider these three main factors.
I think another part that comes up with this is really in terms of the data privacy, so the data privacy impact of these regulations. Amit, thank you for joining us. So Amit, if you could please, from KPMG, Amit, is your mic on?
Yeah.
Hi. So Amit, you could please introduce yourself briefly and provide some privacy.
Yeah. So basically, currently on the. Okay. So the thing is, the good just to before I talk about the data privacy issue specifically, I think that some of the good part which is coming on the crypto side is there's a lot of regulation push coming from the regulator, and as you can see globally, right from BIS, IMF, OCC in US, and majority of the regulators are talking about how to implement regulation. They are talking about to put some supervision framework and those things. and they're starting raising concerns that yes, I probably, if I need to bring this up on board as a regulator framework, what are the risks which are linked with it? One of the risks is on the data privacy issues. What happens to my systematic risk? For example, as you might be knowing that in blockchain, if I have the primary key and somehow I lose a thing, and another thing, everything is going to be lost. So these are some concerns they have, like, you know, how the entire thing will work, what other data will be shared. This where they're trying to work it out. I think some of the new initiatives we've been seeing in the blockchain spaces to come out with some framework. Different crypto firms are start talking with each other and coming out with a common terminologies. Like last I heard is something around data taxonomy, which can run across the different crypto firms. I think if those data privacy issues can be sorted out, I think we should have something, some framework can be ready, and then probably it will be much more easier for people to use cryptocurrencies.
Thank you for that feedback. Now, as industry observers, what are you seeing in terms of the central bank digital currency, the CBDC space? And what's the long-term outlook? Could you please comment on perhaps looking at how the CBDCs are streamlining transactions and other elements of that?
So definitely CBDC is something of interest. All right. If you have attended the Singapore FinTech Festival about 3 years back, where Christine Lagarde came and addressed the audience, right? She is a big fan. Previously, I mean, IMF and of things like, the blockchain technology. And definitely CBDC makes sense, right? Of course, are we still in a too early stage to talk about CBDC? Possibly, but I believe there's a lot of regulation. A lot of countries have already started investing time and effort, right, to look at digital currency, all right? But if you think that having CBDC is something that is being built and then eventually roll out, all right, across the country, that's really not going to be that easy, all right? So I would see that there's actually going to be baby steps that people need to take, all right, countries need to take. Because once you focus on the use cases of CBDC, the next thing then you want to focus on is really how does it go beyond, all right, trading that currency with another digital token that's issued by another country or jurisdiction. So those are still a lot of things that need to be, that still need to iron out, all right? But definitely, I'm quite sure nobody is in denial that CBDC is something that is going to just disappear. No, they won't, all right? There's more work to be done. But then that requires a lot of, redesign, rethinking on how currency works, in the digital world, all right? And I think, of course, Singapore is one of those countries that has done quite a fair bit of work in this area through Project Rubin. But also more importantly, I would say that, it's at least this little red dot, it's probably an easier country to implement something like that, all right, versus a much bigger country, which can be a lot more complicated.
Amit, from the KPMG perspective, is any commentary right now on the developing situation with CBDCs?
Yeah, I think what we've been, I think there are a lot of issues need to sort it out, but where I think the overall value add of CBD is definitely, people have agreed and they have already known that what the advantage will be getting it up or using CBDC. So I think I do agree with that we have a lot of issues, especially when we talk about different regulators, how the digital token will be there, how they will be listed, what about data privacy will be, all that will be there. But as we go along, CBDC will be common. In fact, there was a survey done by IDC where they were saying in next 4 years from now, 40% of the tier 1 banks transaction will move to blockchain, and they'll be moving out from Swift, which is currently happening. So I think, and we even did another survey last year, in especially for the Australia market, and where we even spoken with the different parties, and we do think that next anything between in the 5-10 years, that CBDC is going to be a very, very common thing. in spite of all the hurdles which we are currently getting in up. So the future is really, really very bright.
Okay, thanks for that. I think what are the respective organizations doing in their space? Perhaps if you could perhaps comment on what Access is right now doing in the crypto regulatory space, given the current situation, what we're seeing with Bitcoin and this very frothy market.
Yeah. So yes, we have actually done quite a fair bit. All right. Access has actually been very actively engaging MES. All right. Last few years, and the industry as well. So the very first thing that we actually wrote, which is towards the start of this year, sometime in May, was that the association developed what you call a code of practice. All right. And the code of practices is something that we use as a minimum standard that all crypto exchanges or all virtual asset service providers should meet. And of course, it's very closely aligned to the Payment Services Act license requirements as well. But it is a lot of the what to do in order to fulfill that. So that's the first thing that we actually roll out. The second thing that we rolled out was also again based on the feedback that we had when we developed the code of practice. It was with MES and Association Bank of Singapore. All right. One of the feedback was that again, traditional financial institutions like banks and things like that, they typically build a lot of their own solution. All right, in transaction monitoring, in AML and things like that. Of course, occasionally they tap on some vendors, big global vendors to augment additional information requirements. But other than that, the reality is that they are not used to the fact that in the crypto space, we do have the luxury of a lot of tech firms providing solutions. And RegTech is very big, okay? So a lot of RegTech founders find the gap in the market and thus they build something like that. So example, like I said, people see the need for a travel rule solution and they just jump in, pouring in investment and things like that. So the industry, it's a bit different from the traditional financial industry. All right, the current industry in the crypto space, especially, they do tend to require a lot of, they buy or subscribe to a lot of services that is actually made available to them. However, the only challenge with that is that the other ecosystem, like the regulators, like the banks, for example, they are not familiar with some of these new age RegTech companies that are serving the crypto space. So what the association did was that we implemented independent assessment, right, for such RegTech companies. Okay, we do the job, we publish a report. That report goes to the hand of our members, which are mainly the virtual asset service provider. All right, and then from there, the regulators and banks can also acquire the report, and then they themselves have an independent party, which is like an association like us, who has actually validated, the features of this RegTech solution company, and provide an independent view whether that company has delivered what they claim they will do. Right. So that's one of the key things. And of course, lastly, the association have also set up what you call a CATF, Compliance Action Task Force, that's comply with all the compliance heads and managers of the crypto exchanges, in Singapore that is seeking the PSA license. And the whole idea of this task force is essentially to generate, more collaboration in combating, fraud, scams, money laundering, illicit money, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the key initiatives that the association has actually put in place, okay, to support, the RegTech space and also the crypto space, in the regulatory requirements.
Thank you very much for that, Yusing. I'm afraid we're out of time, so we'll have to move on to the next panel. Over to you. Thank you. Now,
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Shiwen, Yusing, and Amit for sharing your insights on the future. And now we will take a 10-minute break and continue at 11 a.m. So a short coffee break for everyone, a bio break. Please do stay online and we'll see you very soon to kick off at 11 a.m.